Hi co-creators, Fee here, how goes ya? Been inspired by all the clips out here in YouTube land that are advocating reasons to move towards a vegetarian or vegan or raw and real food way of life. Most recently, Felipe Sparks' video entitled Vegetarian Why? Sacred geometry, fractals and a whole host of other awesomeness. And I believe there's many brilliant reasons to adopt a vegetarian way of life. There's spirituality in terms of wanting to up your vibrational frequency. There's health and wellness, karmic reasons such as denouncing animal cruelty. And then of course there is environmental degradation. And this is what I want to talk a little bit about today, because I don't think there's quite enough information out there, or at least it's probably not being talked about enough. And if you love your Mama Earth, then this video is for you, because I want to pose to you that by choosing to eat meat, we are in fact eating up the world. Let's just take US and Australia for example. These are two countries that are endangering their natural animal and plant species at a far greater rate than all the other countries put together. And the number one reason for this is the clearing of natural habitat for pastures and grazing lands for the cattle that we raise, and the increased competition for food and water that this brings about. So bringing it back to Australia, here it takes about 50,000 litres of water to produce 1 kilogram or 2.5 pounds of beef. Now for a country that's typically known to be one of drought, known to have 90% of its land considered as arid or desert or dry, that doesn't really add up. Let's take a crop that we know is really water hungry, such as rice, and we don't grow a lot of rice here in Australia because of that reason. It's seen to require too much water for it to be legitimate or viable. But here it actually only takes 2,500 litres of water to produce 1 kilogram of rice, and it takes far less than that to produce the same amount of fruit and veggies. So what's that saying? If you've looked at the sheer land mass of Australia on the map, it's pretty epic, especially considering we've got all that land with a mere population of 21 million. Something that might be a bit hard to believe is that half of our entire continent is dedicated to the grazing of cattle, which are grown for human consumption. And that's not even including the land that's dedicated to growing grains and hay and pasture for these animals to feed on. Victoria, the state that I live in Australia, we have designated agricultural water, and about 80% of this water goes to growing the grain and hay for the cattle to feed on. 80%. 10% of this water goes to growing the fruit and veggies for human consumption. So again, I want to ask, does it make sense to grow food, to feed us? I think not. Australia actually, and this is a trippy fact, we produce enough grain to feed the entire population of the world 1.5 times over. That's pretty amazing, but the tragedy in it is that most of this grain actually goes towards feeding our cattle for human consumption, which would only in turn feed, I'd say, less than 10% of the entire population. Some might say, why don't we just turn to the ocean for our feed? Well, I'd say no, it's a bit late for that. We've got designated international fishing zones, and the majority of these zones are completely used up. They're now just underwater wastelands, and the few that remain are already overexploited and really hold no future at all. And if you think that farming fish is a viable solution, well, again, I'd argue no, because it actually takes 5 kilograms of wild fish to produce 1 kilogram of farmed fish. So again, it's completely unsustainable and there's no future in that. I mean, I haven't even touched on the environmental degradation that, say, cattle actually do to our riverbanks, and that industries such as leather, they actually dump all the toxic chemicals like mercury and chromium and a whole host of others that I can barely pronounce into our waterways, polluting them pretty badly. Like, it's got to a pretty messy state, and because most of us are living in cities and rely on the shipment or truckload of food to be from the country to come in and provide us, and all that food's looking shiny and clean and big and delicious, I suppose, but in reality we don't see firsthand what's really going on. I want to suggest that there's definitely a way through this. I don't mean to be presenting a doom and gloom scenario and saying it's all downhill from here, because it's certainly that way through is taking it back into the people's hands. Let's grow our own food, our own fruit and veg. Let's all get into permaculture, a permanent culture. Permanent culture is the exact opposite of agriculture or monoculture, where you see thousands of kilometres covered in the same crop. Permaculture is actually about making nature even more efficient than it already is. It believes that by a helping human hand we can make nature more abundant and more prolific, by helping to set up ecosystems and recreating ecosystems. The idea is that you put in very little work and you reap massive benefits and rewards out of it. With agriculture, for instance, we put in a hell of a lot more energy than we actually reap out of it. The machines to do the work, the herbicides and pesticides that are made and then put on the vegetables, the transportation, the refrigeration, there's a whole host of energy costly processes to bring food about the way that it is done today. If we could just step back into a more hands-on approach where we have the knowledge inside of each and every one of us to be able to grow and provide ourselves and our family with food, I mean, that knowledge is key, especially in the changing times of today when the future is very unpredictable and we don't quite know where we stand. Because let's face it, if you love Earth, if you love your Mother Earth, then surely you would want to help sustain it and nourish it. I mean, like it or not, and how could you not, we are of the Earth. We were born of the Earth. What we do to the Earth, we do to ourselves. So let's move forward through this together. Let's create an abundant forest of food. In Australia, for instance, we could easily repopulate our native vegetation and therefore repopulate our native beautiful animals and wildlife. We can make sure, we can guarantee that there is a future for our children and hopefully even for ourselves. And by choosing to eat meat, and because we vote with our pocket, you see, we vote with our wallets, so by choosing to eat meat, we are in fact voting and supporting the processes by which it is brought about. So I just want to encourage you guys, next time you're at the supermarket walking down the long aisle of packaged meat, to think about this and to have a little think about where your food actually comes from and how it gets from A to B. And once you do, I think you'll also see that there's no future in it. And by continuing to do it, I really feel that we're just being selfish and greedy for no real reason at all. Okay guys, I hope this reaches out to some of you, and I welcome all feedback, positive or negative. Give me all you got. Alright, much love. Bye.